Hey, this is David Plotz, CEO of CityCast. I have a favor to ask before we get to today's conversation. We're doing our annual listener survey, and it would really help us out if you took it. And even if you took it last year, we'd be grateful if you took it again, because we can't use last year's data. Please go to citycast.fm/survey to take the survey. It's only 7 minutes long, we know, because we timed it. That's citycast.fm/survey. And when you take the survey, you'll also be eligible to win a $250 Visa gift card and CityCast swag, that great CityCast swag. citycast.fm/survey.
The weather this winter has been brutally cold and windy, so why not stay indoors with some hearty chili? The 5th annual Chili Cook-Off is happening at Sonny's Pizza on February 23rd. Attendees will get to sample over 10 varieties of chili, all from local Georgia Avenue small businesses. RSVP for free or grab a VIP pass, which includes early entry, guaranteed chili tastings, and other perks. Again, that's the 5th annual Chili Cook-Off at Sonny's Pizza. That's in Columbia Heights on Georgia Avenue between Irving and Kenyon, and it's on February 23rd. Today on CityCast DC, is DC going to become the next Detroit? That is the fear as President Trump moves to slash the federal workforce. And we're going to talk to two people about what the big national news of the week means for our city. Emilia Calma from the DC Policy Center studies the local economy. She's here to talk about the impact of possible federal cuts on the health of the region. And the Washington Post's Aaron Wiener has spent the week talking to federal employees, and he's here to talk about how they're feeling about the president's efforts to buy them out. Today is Thursday, January 30th. I'm Michael Schaefer, and here's what DC is talking about. Hey, Aaron.
Hey, Mike.
So in Trump's first 10 days, there's been this whirlwind of shocking moves about the federal budget and the federal workforce. The latest is this buyouts deal that Trump is offering. What exactly is the buyout offer?
An email went out to federal government employees telling them that they were being offered what was called deferred resignation, which basically they had until February 6th, next week, to decide whether or not they wanted to take an offer to allow them to resign with pay through September 30th. It was initially unclear what they would be doing between now and September 30th, but the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, run by Elon Musk, clarified on X that they would not be expected to work and they could just chill and watch movies if they wanted to.
So listen, you've been talking to federal workers, which we now know there's about 200,000 of the jobs in D.C. That's about a quarter of them are federal jobs. So you've been talking to them about this exploding offer from the Trump administration. The clock is ticking. They've got a week to decide. How are they feeling?
They're feeling stressed. Some of them are feeling afraid. Some of them are feeling very distrustful. And I would say the most common reaction is confusion.
Is anyone in favor of it? Is anyone going to take this deal?
There are people who are going to take it for sure. I mean, I did speak with one labor lawyer today who represents federal employees. And he told me that his phone's been ringing off the hooks. But one thing that he's been advising his clients is if they're on a performance improvement plan, if they're kind of on thin ice to begin with, they should definitely take this deal because they're the ones who are likeliest to face the axe if they don't. For others, there are a whole variety of factors that they're weighing right now.
Is anyone against it?
Any employees?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, one of the most common reactions that I've been hearing from people is just distrust, right? There are people who feel like this is a bait and switch that, either deliberately or just through incompetence, that it won't really stand, and that the promise to pay them through September might not be carried out, and that these people who sign up are essentially just putting themselves on a list that'll make it easier to fire them.
I imagine it must be incredibly demoralizing to, hear that they want to make, they're estimating 10 to 15%, but they want to make some very large number of your coworkers go away.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm hearing from a lot of employees who are outraged by this, who are afraid for what it'll mean for their departments, even people who have no intention of leaving themselves, worried that their agencies could be decimated by it.
Which I presume is an extra motivation to leave if you want to leave.
Yes, although the reactions have been interesting. I mean, there's a whole thread on the subreddit for federal workers that's basically preaching defiance. It's just saying they want us to leave. Well, we're not going anywhere. There's a meme that's circulating from The Wolf of Wall Street with Leonardo DiCaprio's character saying, "I'm not effing leaving." And a lot of workers are posting that and echoing it and saying they want us out. Well, screw that. I'm staying.
Right. So this is like this page that's gone viral about how people are talking about the delayed offer. It's making them want to dig in their heels instead of do what the administration seems to want.
Exactly. And you have to remember, too, this is all coming on the heels of the other orders that Trump issued on his first day in office, including a return to office mandate, which already had a lot of people confused. There are a lot of remote workers who may live hundreds or thousands of miles from the nearest office, and they're not sure where they're even supposed to return to. And people who are affected by the DEI order, who worry their jobs could be on the line as well. And so people are kind of taking in all of this information at once without a lot of answers.
Well, then there's this other thing, which is that they've now rescinded the freeze of already appropriated money that went to a lot of different kinds of places. But in DC, particularly in the DMV, there are a lot of NGOs, there's a lot of think tanks, there's a lot of places where this federal money goes through. And many of them, after this order came out, were thinking we will not be able to make payroll this week. And that's a lot more of your neighbors in addition to the feds. So this sort of mood is everywhere, not just federal employees.
For sure. And there's so much whiplash as things go in one direction and then go in another direction. And people are just sort of left wondering where this is all going to land.
Well, right. And including like if you're like a barber or some old school profession, because that's a lot of your customers.
Yeah, exactly.
Senator Tim Kaine, I mean, you alluded to this before, of people wondering whether they were going to be too incompetent to actually carry through on this. Senator Tim Kaine said that this deal is meant to stiff people.
The president has no authority to make that offer. There's no budget line item to pay people who are not showing up for work. This is a guy who made this promise to contractors again and again and again when he was a private business guy. The contractor does the work and then finds out they get stiffed. Don't be fooled. If you accept that offer and resign, he'll stiff you just like he stiffed the contractors. And you will regret it just like these contractors regretted it who did work for this guy when he was a businessman.
What does he mean by that?
Yeah, what he said, he went on the Senate floor shortly after it came out, and he said, essentially, the money is not appropriated for the government to pay all these people out through September. And so if the money's not there, there's no guarantee you're actually going to get the payment that the administration is promising you. And so you shouldn't take the deal, or you could get stiffed, in his words. And the two of the big unions representing federal government employees have also been urging their members not to take the deal.
And what about the lawyers you're talking to? Are they saying that it's bulletproof, or are they saying that you shouldn't count on that money?
Right. Well, one labor lawyer I talked to said he thinks it's probably within the president's authority, but he also expects that it's going to be subject to litigation. So again, kind of unclear where it all lands. He estimated that, based on the conversations that he's had, that about 5 to 10% of the federal employees he's talked to will ultimately take it.
So the time element here can't be understated. It contributes to this feeling of chaos, anxiety, which again is like, even if you're strictly in the private sector, it's not good to be doing your business in a place full of chaos and uncertainty about making plans. It's the same thing that's overwhelmed DC this week, with Trump trying to freeze that federal funding, then backstepping, only freezing some, then having it blocked by a judge, then rescinding the order entirely. It's just all in 48 hours. Based on your conversations out there, not with economists, but with regular workers, what does this do to the psyche of a city?
I feel like DC has just been consumed by this, right? You can't really have conversations with friends or neighbors who are not in some way touched by an element of this, even if they don't themselves work for the federal government. It has the potential to be so far-reaching. And that's kind of what I'm hearing from people everywhere. It's just, everyone is processing what this could mean, and there's so many questions and so few answers.
Has it been hard for you to get people to talk to you?
Well, I should say that everyone I've talked to who works in the federal government today who has requested anonymity. I've been speaking to a lot of people through Signal, the encrypted messaging app, because they want to be on a platform they know they can trust. There are a lot of people who have a lot to share, but they really want to make sure that their personal details are not going to get out because they know how delicate the situation is for their jobs.
So just walk us through, what are the next steps? We've got a week or so.
I mean, so much has happened in the last 24 hours. I don't even want to try to predict what's going to happen in the next 24. But in theory, people have to give a response by February 6th of whether they're taking this buyout or not. In practice, again, like you mentioned with the freeze on grants, it's moved in both directions so fast. I kind of would be surprised if things didn't change to some significant degree between now and February 6th. So it's, I'm loath to try to predict what's going to happen. In theory, you've got all these federal workers who have basically a week to decide their futures and figure out if they're going to leave their jobs or if they're going to try to stick it out and see what this very uncertain future holds for them.
Hey, Aaron, thank you so much.
Thanks, Mike. Good to be with you.
And after the break, we've got an interview with the District Policy Center's Emilia Calma about how these buyouts will impact DC's economy and culture. More on that in just a second. Hey, are you ready to add a little joie de vivre to your spring? At the Alliance Française of Washington, D.C., early spring classes are just around the corner. The Alliance Française of Washington, D.C. offers language courses tailored to every level. Early spring session starts on February 24th, and if you enroll by January 31st, you will receive a $20 discount. So if you've ever dreamed of ordering your morning cafe in perfect French or discussing art and history with ease, now's your chance. But it's not just about the language courses. A membership with the Alliance Française of Washington, D.C. brings you into a vibrant community that celebrates all things French. You get exclusive access to cultural events, wine tastings, film screenings, and more. Visit www.francedc.org to start your journey. And don't forget, sign up by January 31st and you will get $20 off tuition when you enroll.
When it's cold outside, there is nothing better than a warmly lit restaurant and a cozy 3-course meal. And Winter Restaurant Week makes that actually accessible. It's happening this year from Monday, January 27th through Sunday, February 2nd. There are more than 250 participating restaurants this year, spanning over 70 different cuisines. So I love going to Restaurant Week because it's a chance to try out places that otherwise might be a little out of my budget. And there's something both fancy and relaxing about sitting down to a meal where you just pick from a curated menu at the start and then just let the courses come to you. Participating restaurants are offering brunch and lunch for either $25 or $35 per person. Dinners range from $40 to $65. Some spots even have drink pairings, which is very much right up my alley. Visit rwdmv.com to see restaurant menus and make reservations. Metropolitan Washington Restaurant Week is presented by the Restaurant Association, Metropolitan Washington, and Events DC.
Hey, Emilia.
Hi, Michael. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for being here. The big national news is like lawyers and politicians arguing about whether this is legal. You study the DMV. And here, especially, this stuff has a major impact on daily life and our economy. How many workers in the region could we be talking about?
Elon Musk says that they're estimating that 10% of the people will leave the federal workforce. And so that's about 20,000 people total.
Because there's 200,000 federal jobs in the District of Columbia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's about 20% of our workforce. That being said, not all those people live in D.C. We actually have no clue how many of them live in D.C. versus Maryland or Virginia or even further away if they're completely remote work.
What would that do to the local economy specifically?
It's really hard to estimate. I think in an era before the pandemic, when everyone was coming into work and everyone was downtown, you could estimate some sort of loss on local businesses, transportation, those kind of metrics. But in this current environment where so many people are working remote, it's really, really hard to estimate what the effects will be.
I guess you could also suspect that, if the people more likely to take it are the ones who don't want to come back to the office, and maybe some of them have already moved far away from their agency. So that would, in theory, mean less DC impact and more, rural, beautiful coast someplace impact.
That's true. We also know that remote work is better for people with certain circumstances. So people with disabilities or people who have children, there's a lot of instances in which remote work is actually much better for them. And so it's possible that they'll be more impacted.
So I guess like the big question, and I live on a pretty small block here, and I know a couple neighbors who are pretty convinced they're going to lose their jobs. Someone else who is in a NGO where they're worried about whether they would be able to make payroll. That's just, like a tiny sample size. And, I'm sort of struck by this question that my wife asked me yesterday, which is, are we going to become Detroit? You study the regional economy. What do you say when people ask you that?
I say I really hope not. We
Well, me too.
we hope that, we have a more diverse economy than that. But in the past, the federal government's presence and consistency has actually weathered us against recessions. That wasn't necessarily true of COVID, but that was true of 2008 and many recessions before that. DC performed better than the national average and better than a lot of other cities.
One of the things about Washington has always been that, the government and sort of government adjacent contractors or NGOs, kind of workplaces, they create a kind of culture of stability about the place. That, Washington does not have the sort of highs of like Wall Street wealth, but it also doesn't have the like shocking drops of extreme free market economy. But this moment of like, oh my God, all this stuff that I had thought was certain, that I had accepted less money that I could make in the private sector in exchange for knowing it was certain, that could go away, and there could be mass layoffs. That changes the culture of a city. Do you have thoughts about like what that does to this place you study?
Well, DC's population, especially since 2000, has grown year after year, and it's been driven by people coming here for work. It's been driven by people internationally, but especially in the US, moving to DC for jobs, both in the federal government and in a lot of these adjacent sectors. Already, we can see that migration has slowed down. It means that DC is not growing in the way that it used to grow, and that has impacts on everything else. It means that less children are going into public school, and we're collecting less money in taxes that we can devote to public services. It has impacts on the housing market. And for the city to really thrive and be vibrant, we need to be attracting residents and growing. And part of that is making this a really attractive and friendly working environment, which I would say this is working directly against.
And then there's this other thing, which is the suburbs. We're obviously politically divided by region, but I was surprised to read in some of these stories about this that the percentages of the state budgets of Maryland and Virginia that come from federal money are higher than the percentage of the DC budget that does. But these suburbs are where a lot of this federal workforce lives, even if they happen to work in the district. And they potentially would face a real economic impact too. And this explains why the Maryland and Virginia delegations have been some of the most vocal against what's going on. Can you explain what the sort of regional impact is, if insofar as it's different than the city impact?
Yeah, well, a lot of workers, as I said, don't necessarily live in DC. A lot of them live in neighboring Maryland and Virginia. In pre-pandemic times, 2/3 of DC's workforce would commute into the city every single day. And so there's a lot of people who live outside, and all the effects I just mentioned, on the local economy, on housing, on tax monies collected, on funds that go to local businesses like restaurants and places that cut hair and all the normal services that you use in your everyday life, coffee shops. If people leave or if people lose their jobs, it's really hard on the local economies. All those businesses lose a huge amount of money. People might leave the region.
So look, this is the counter argument, I guess, which is I was talking to a headhunter friend who said, look, the regional unemployment rate, particularly for college graduates, is incredibly low, and that other private sector businesses have relocated, like Amazon, precisely because it contains so much expertise, and basically suggesting that the private sector economy could absorb a lot of this hit. What do you say to that?
I suppose we don't actually know the full extent of what the the private sector could absorb. Logic follows that if those businesses could hire more people, then possibly they already would have. And anecdotally, I would say that the labor market is really, really tight. It's hard for people at this moment of time to find new jobs. A lot of places in this chaos are not hiring. And I don't think it's quite a one-to-one ratio.
So basically, there's not that many places for laid off people, particularly people taking buyouts. And the federal workforce is weirdly old. I mean, like the average worker is like in their 50s, and I assume people taking buyouts would probably be older. So that there's not necessarily a place for these particular people to land, which is, you know, a lot of our friends and neighbors, and for that matter, customers if we run a barber shop.
Yeah, I would hope that there would be, you know, a place that could absorb their expertise and knowledge in government. But at this point in time, I just don't know what the hiring capacity is in the private sector.
It feels like we're in kind of a limbo right now. What happens next?
I suppose we wait and see how many people take these deferred letters of resignation. If people take the deferred letters of resignation, then we'll know how many people are leaving the workforce by September. And in the meantime, you know, we hope that it doesn't cause too much chaos.
Emilia, thank you so much.
Of course, thank you.
That's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.